Alright guys, I found this on Business Insider, and to be honest, it's a bit chilling given the information of everything coming out. Now, we've all seen these types of things before. Different documents show different things, and there has been several instances in the American history where the military has had to come in under some organization or another and put down some kind of a rebellion. But for the United States Army to have come out through Business Insider and several other sources and basically give the ground rules, including what DHS would be assigned to do, means that these guys in the background are starting to talk, and they're going to start probably getting to a point where, all right, guys, Group A is on the move, Group B is on the move. What the hell are these militia boys doing? They going to take that fort or not? I don't know, sir. And that's kind of what it's going to be. It's going to be kind of start getting real sketchy. So the United States Army is publicly discussing how the United States government would go about putting down an armed rebellion. They discussed plans on a city, but I truly believe if such a thing were to actually happen, it would be across an entire county in a week. It would not in any way, shape, or form be contained to a single city. So this is what I'm getting, and it gets kind of scary when you talk about this, and I'm not trying to get this to be insurrection or anything of that sort. Business Insider, Military and Defense, 2016-8, folks. This is how the U.S. military put down an armed rebellion. Alright, so you guys might have heard about this, you might have not heard about this. There's a little bit on this involving cultural studies and military paper out of the University of Foreign Military and Cultural Studies professor Kevin Benson, Kansas University history professor, yada yada yada. And it kind of goes into some of the history that the paper talks about. And basically the whole idea is that there would be a scenario where a Tea Party motivated militia would take over a town. They chose Darlington, South Carolina for some reason. Now, when this was written, the circumstances were far-fetched. The circumstances are no longer far-fetched, folks. The idea that these guys are doing what they're doing in the cities, in the states, in the counties, and across the board is becoming very, very heavy. I've told you that I have seen entire populations of homeless persons virtually disappear in my area. And there have been rumors as to what has happened to them. And no one's seen them around this or that, so I'm not going to bug you with all those details, but I'm going to talk about this and how it talks about the precedents for fighting an armed insurrection. In this paper, Benson and Weber write and cite Abraham Lincoln's executive actions during the Civil War and Dwight Eisenhower's 1957 intervention of Little Rock, Arkansas, as precedents for executive use of force crushing a rebellion. The president would be able to mobilize the military and Department of Homeland Security to recapture a secessionist city or secessionist city and restore the elected government. That is, if they're still around. More than likely, half of them would be killed. I'm just saying it as it is, folks. You've all seen the movies. You all know what happens when this sort of thing happens. What's the first move? Probably the removal of the current government. And unfortunately, keeping them in a safe area, and everything else wouldn't be the smartest idea, but the government would invoke Insurrection Act of 1807, which no doubt has several updates. This comes from Title 10 of the U.S. Code of the President, and it may use militia or armed forces to 33.1 suppress an insurrection against a state government at the request of the legislature or not in session, the governor. Yes, I do have these in picture form. I tried to put up something earlier and it wasn't working out well. 332. Suppress unlawful obstruction or rebellion against the United States. 333. Suppress insurrection or domestic violence if it 1. Hinders the execution of the laws to the extent that a part or class of citizens are deprived of constitutional rights and the state is unable or refuses to protect those rights. Or 2. Obstructs the execution of any federal law or impedes the course of justice under federal law or federal laws. 333, I think, needs a little discussion. Basically, if there's violence, domestic violence, pushing, shoving, assault, any type of situation, the police are moved in to stop it. And basically, if any class of citizens are deprived of their constitutional rights, or the state is unable or refuses to protect those rights, it goes from the state government to the federal government. And if anything obstructs the execution of any federal law or impedes the course of justice under federal law, in other words, an entire group of police are handcuffed and moved into school buses or something, and they're moved off site. They go in, they get the governor, go in and get several mayors. Crazy shit starts happening. The federal government, local government, and their police are no longer in control. Then it comes to the state government to basically say, hey, we need assistance, we need the National Guard or others. Then it comes down to the Insurrection Act governs the role of military, local law enforcement, and civilian leadership inside the United States as this type of scenario plays out. I'm going to try to move through this fast, but unfortunately there's a lot here. That's why I didn't even bother to try to move through it on a website, because I was just having a horrible time. How everything basically goes down. An extreme right, this is the scenario right here. An extreme right-wing militia takes over Darlington, South Carolina, placing a mayor under house arrest and disabling city council. Local police are disarmed or sympathetic to the militia's cause and integrated into the militia. So that's a possible scenario. However, I don't know about that. But the more guys with guns you have, the better your cause is. I don't know. The rebels choke traffic on Interstate 95 and 20, collecting tolls to fund their arsenal in operation. Militiamen also stop rail lines and detain anyone who protests their actions. The insurgents use social media and press conferences to invoke Declaration of Independence as their rationale, arguing that they have a right to alter or abolish existing government or replace it with another that, in the words of the Declaration, shall seem most likely to affect their safety and their happiness. Not the lines I would choose, but okay, screw it. Because of this, they enjoy groundswell of support from similarly minded locals throughout the state. The mayor contacts the government and his congressman. The governor doesn't call out the National Guard for fear they'd side with the militiamen. Bullshit. That's the first group you contact. You tell them, you go in hard. But let's just say the scenario plays out the way they believe it. He monitors the situation using the state police, but through aides, he asks the federal government to step in and restore order. but cannot do so publicly. Hang on, I'm doing this. The President of the United States then gives the militia 15 days to disperse. Bullshit, I'd give them 5. The executive branch first calls in the National Guard to federal service. The Joint Staff alerts U.S. Northern Command, who ordered the U.S. Army North 5th U.S. Army to form a Joint Task Force headquarters. Local units go on alert. In this case, the United States Army at Forts Bragg, Stewart's in North Carolina, Georgia, respectively, and Marines at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, are alerted. Move in for presence. The 5th Army begins its mission analysis and intelligence preparations in the battlefield. This includes localizing enemy base, critical infrastructure, terrain, potential weather, and other important information. Once the 5th Army commander has a complete picture of the militia's behavioral patterns, deployment of forces, activity inside the town, he begins to phase deployment of federal forces. Now, at that point, I would send in groups to start executing their leadership. Fuck all this. You send in Delta and you go get their families or something. Sorry, folks. This all sounds nice on paper, but in reality, you get these guys in and you get them out. The 5th Army is in command of the military forces, but the Department of Justice is still the lead federal agency in charge on the ground. Attorney General can design a senior civilian representative of the Attorney General, SCRAG, to coordinate federal agencies and has the authority to assign mission to federal military forces. The Attorney General may also appoint senior federal law enforcement officer to coordinate federal enforcement activities. At this point, basically to note, the constitutional protections afforded American citizens still apply to those in arms against government. See, I wouldn't even do that. For instance, federal judges will still have to authorize wiretaps on rebel phones during phases on federal response, etc. It sounds nice on paper, folks, but I'm certain they already have clauses in preparation that already has signatures on the ground. Troops on the ground will be aware of local, national, and international media constantly watching them, and their incidents of gunfire will likely be investigated. Beginning combat operations will begin to show force operation against militiamen to remind the rebels they are now dealing with the United States military. Army Marine Corps units will begin capturing and dismantling the checkpoints and roadblocks held by the militia members. That's exactly what I would do with the National Guard. But you guys get the idea. They claim they would be sympathetic. Well, is what it is. This is just a scenario. All federal troops will use a minimum amount of force, violence, and numbers necessary, only increasing to put pressure on the insurrection leaders. After dismantling checkpoints, soldiers and Marines will recapture critical infrastructures, areas in the city, such as water and power stations, as well as TV and radio stations and hospitals. Meanwhile, state law enforcement and activated National Guard units will care for the fleeing and residents of the city. This is partly for political reasons, allowing the government most susceptible to local voters to be seen largely absent from being in direct, sometimes armed conflict with their own elected officials. Restoring government control. Federal forces will maintain law and order on the streets of the city as elected officials return to their offices. Drawing on U.S. military history, the government will likely be given individual members of militia a general amnesty while prosecuting the leadership and those who broke the law during the uprising. They kind of did that with the Bundys, but they kind of didn't. So, I don't know, folks. This is the way I see it happening. you would be given a warning. I guarantee you shots would go downrange between local federal police and the militia. I guarantee that, folks. I don't give a shit what their scenario says. If John C. Public decides to take his militia and take over, I don't know, city A, B, and C, John C. Public is going to meet those police officers at one point or another. That is going to happen in the first 24. I don't give a shit what that document says. Lots of bad stuff is going to come from that. And I guarantee you there's going to be a whole lot of stuff going on between what the police are doing at night to recapture the city and what the federal forces are planning. I guarantee you there isn't an officer in that area who would want to see the Army and the Marines on the ground before they retake the city. So I guarantee you they would be running around with shotguns at night doing drive-bys and shit in the area. I know there has to be some kind of clause, folks, where basically you go, fuck it. We're here to retake the city before those guys get here, before the Army and the Marines hit the ground. And so the militia would not be in total peace and prosperity. I guarantee you the police would be handling at least part of this before this happened. And I guarantee you the real hardcore guys would not sit there on their ass and let the U.S. Army or even DHS tell them what to do in this type of scenario. At that point, law enforcement would be almost as much of a threat to the United States Army and Marines as it would be to the insurrectionists. So you would have like 3 or 4 factions that you would be fighting almost in the beginning because the police would have taken and hold something eventually. The militia would be doing their thing. 2-3 days later, these guys would be on the ground running special forces operations. They would be, taking pictures and, getting spies together to find out who these guys are, what they're doing. That'd be done by the 5th Army, as you saw. But FBI would have already had some information they would have passed through by now. So this idea that it's a nice, quaint little scenario is absolute bullshit. I guarantee you if a militia actually takes and holds a city or a county, I honestly think it would be something like a county. I do. And they start doing that stuff, I guarantee you there would be a point where the police would say, you know what? Guys, suit up. We're going to retake this fort before these guys get here. DHS wants to clean up afterward? Great. And they would have a night of the long knives alongside everybody else. I guarantee you SWAT teams would not just sit on their ass and wait for the Army and the Marines and DHS to get involved. I mean, let's be honest about what we've seen these guys do. You would have 2 or 3 major scenarios where, forts would be taken overnight. There'd be 70, 80, 90 civilians killed by police trying to, retake fortifications with or without permission from the government. It would be WACO times like 100. And they would be doing this at the same time the Army and the Marines would be trying to, gather information and everything. And at that point, shit would just hit the fan. So, it's a nice, quaint idea that the Business Insider put out that form, but it is so far happy-go-lucky, it's ridiculous. If there was an actual armed insurrection rebellion inside the United States, the police would be on it harder than anything, trying to retake stuff before the Army and the Marines are there. They don't give a shit if it would be the militia or not. DHS can say and do whatever they want. But it would be the police that would try to be doing what they did during Bundy Ranch. And if they were fired upon, they would return fire. And then they do WACO-style situations. Now, I know that everybody wants to say, well, DHS wouldn't allow it. You know what? If you're being fired upon, guess what? You're returning fire. And when the Army and the Marines came down on it, they might have 3 or 4 factions they would have to contend with. It wouldn't just be the militia now. Now it would be the police who have, half their guys wounded, and they're still trying to retake the forts. And now they say, well, we don't need you guys here. Well, yes, you do. Oh, the hell we do. And then, that leadership would come under fire. And then you'd have the civilian jihadis, the lone wolf guys sitting on rooftops now with their sniper rifles that are not part of the militia. When the Army and everything come in, that's exactly what you would have. And before that. So there would be like 4 or 5 major factions, and it would just go balls to the wall insane within the first couple of days. Not to mention that food would run out and everything else. Oh, man. Folks, it's not a scenario you want in your city or anything else. Thank you.